Okay, so we now welcome on the Power of the Towel podcast, part of the Next Misconduct Network of podcast. Our guest today is the producer of the Scott Rintoul show on Sportsnet 650 and the one in Calgary. I don't know the number for it. He's also one of the hosts of Canucks Central, is Jamie Dodd. Jamie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Sportsnet 960 in Calgary is
960.
our sister station on the other side of the Rockies.
Okay, cool. So, my first question is, when am I getting back on radio?
Well, we'll see, man.
I've been waiting on this message for like a month now. Like, what's going on?
You did a great job. I think you were the first, because I've started doing this show for people that haven't had a chance to listen. I've been doing a show on Saturdays, Canucks Central Saturday, and
Yep,
one of the things I decided I want to do is, we have so many people not only just writing about the Canucks, talking about the Canucks on Twitter, but people doing podcasts like this one, right, in the city, in the community. And so I've been trying to have a different podcaster on every week. It's been great. You were the first one, I believe. You were the kind of
late January
guinea pig. Yeah.
I don't know when you started it, but it was late January.
Yeah. So the guinea pig of the experiment, sort of, and you were awesome. So you will get the return invite. The thing is, like, as I'm saying, there's such a long list of podcasts. I'm trying to work my way through the list, so don't worry, it'll come. It'll come.
That's why I've never had a recurring guest on this podcast. I get it. Like, you want to keep the streak going. You want to have someone different every week. It's kind of not that, like, I've never wanted a recurring guest on this show. It's just, it's addictive. Like, I want to see, like, who else I can get on this show, right? Like, I totally get it, but it still kind of hurts a bit. I'm not gonna
fair enough. But I will say, the great thing about it is, like, you were really good. I've had Kevin Olynyk on. He was really good. Pete Edwards of the Canucks Speakeasy podcast. And it's been great just, because I know from talking to people that might have another platform, but when they get on radio, it's like, oh, there's a tendency to be a little nervous, but all of you have been awesome. So it's like, this is great. I can go back to any of you at any time, and I know it'll be a fun segment and a fun chat.
Oh man, I was so nervous for that radio. It's because it's that you said, like, it's different. Like,
yeah,
like been on different podcasts before. I've done live streams before, but there's something different about radio. When, like, I'm just thinking before, like, some random dude's driving around, doing his thing on a Saturday, and, like, he's gonna be listening to me. And, like, I've done all this stuff. I don't know if my parents listen to this podcast. I don't know. I don't know if they listen to these live streams, but they were listening on the radio when I was doing my hit. My uncle's phoning up all his buddies, and he's letting hey, my nephew's going to be on Sportsnet 650. Tune in. Like,
yeah,
it's just something very different about being on radio, and I do appreciate the opportunity. It was
great.
It was a lot of fun.
I'm glad you had fun. I had fun. I'm having a lot of fun doing it, actually, and getting to know, some of the people behind the podcast a little bit more. And from what I've heard, like, the response from listeners has been really positive, right? Because, like, it's our listenership, obviously huge Canucks fans. So a lot of them, if they haven't had a chance to check out the podcast, they're looking for more ways to follow the Canucks, right? So I think people are just always excited to see new voices get an opportunity, get a chance on radio. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun so far.
Yeah, and with recent news in the Vancouver sports media market, like, podcasts, I firmly believe that podcasts are going to be, like, a bigger part of this market going forward. And just having TSN 1040 getting yanked out from under them, like, the rug kind of just pulled out all of a sudden, just going to exacerbate that. Like, I'm very fortunate here. Like, Kyle Bowen's technically the podcast manager here at Next Misconduct. Hopefully he doesn't pull the plug on me anytime soon. Kyle, I don't know if you're listening to this, but I hope I'm doing a good enough job. If I want to write something for Next Misconduct, I just message Begsy, and we can get that going. And like, the only people who can pull the plug on me for this are the big wigs, the higher ups at SB Nation, and they don't even respond to our emails. They don't even listen to this. So I'm not too worried about that.
There's something to be said for out of sight, out of mind, right? But
that's pretty much what we are, the Next Misconduct Network with SB Nation.
You're absolutely right about podcasts, and not so much at Sportsnet 650, but you hear things from other people in the radio industry and talk to other people, and I think some people see podcasting as a threat to radio, and I don't really agree with that, because I do think they fill, like, obviously there's crossover, right? And people that listen to your podcast, probably a lot of them are sports radio listeners and vice versa, but I do think they fill different niches as well. Like, with a podcast, you can do more in-depth, long-form interviews, right? You get a little more casual. It's an independent media, so you can be a little bit looser with what you say and all that. And on the flip side, on radio, it's live, it's immediate. You can have, it facilitates more interaction with the listeners. So to me, they do different things, and I see them in the future as being more complementary than a competition. I mean, you'll see companies like Rogers and Bell and all of them try to get into the podcast game in the future too, right? So yeah, I listened to podcasts before I got into radio. I still listen to podcasts, and I've never felt threatened by the growth of podcasts. Like, I think it's another opportunity. I think it's, the more, as you said, especially with recent events in Vancouver, the more smart people, fun people talking about the Canucks, covering the team, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kyle and I were actually we're talking about this. I think our love of audio programming, not to turn this, I know you work for Sportsnet 650, not to turn this into like a TSN
Oh, sure.
40 love fest, but like, I think our love of audio programming, and if you think back why we decided to get into this, is because of, then the Team 1040 when we were kids, right? Like, I don't know.
100%.
Are you from
Yeah, I grew up in North Van.
Okay, perfect. So you perfectly understand it. Like,
yep.
TSN Team 1040 was the only game in town for a while. Yep. I remember, driving around with my dad, listening to it, and very similar story for Kyle, I assume. And yeah, I think, I know the big thing now is video podcasts. Like, you can watch it on YouTube or whatever. To me, like, listening to podcasts is going around doing stuff. And I think that comes from listening to, Team 1040 back in the day, right? Like, it was very cool to see the respect that a lot of these guys paid to TSN 1040 when it went down, not only because of the sudden way it kind of went down with the time of your life, good riddance or whatever. I don't think people who play that song understood the actual message of song. It's supposed to be a sarcastic song. Yeah. It's supposed to be a sarcastic song if anyone hasn't listened to it. And yeah, the way it was pulled out, and again, a lot of those people like Dan Murphy, like, he was even paying his respects on the broadcast, and I know he used to be on Team 1040 in the past as a contributor. So it was cool to see the respect that a lot of the people in your industry who actually like are in positions, showed TSN 1040.
Well, it's one thing, I've only been in the industry for not even really 3 years yet, but one thing you learn really quickly is it's a small industry, especially in Vancouver, right? Like, it's not a major media market in the same way that Vancouver or some places in the States are. And I just think of all the connections that existed between 650 and 1040. Like, our program director, Craig McEwen, worked at SportsPage and Sportsnet with Don Taylor forever. Like, they're close friends, right? And, Scott Rintoul, obviously the host I work with, was a longtime 1040 guy. Cam Bear was behind the scenes there. Dom Shermatti, who produces Reach Deep, started at 1040. Like, just on and on and on. Dan Murphy obviously knows those guys really well. There's so many connections, and as much as there was a competition, there's also a lot of like camaraderie and a feeling of being colleagues with each other. And as you said, I mean, not only to lose the station, but to have it done in just like the most callous, ridiculous, stupid way possible, heartless way, inhumane, in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, we don't need to rehash all of the ways that Bell screwed the pooch on that one, but it was like, just the other thing you learn about this industry quickly is that people get pretty jaded to layoffs in a hurry because they happen so frequently. Even for the very jaded people, that one hit different because it was just done in a completely ridiculous manner. So even for people who've been in the industry for 20 years and have been laid off themselves, they still were like, holy cow, what just happened? I can't believe that. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I'm fortunate enough that no one could really lay me off of this podcast. Even if they did, they don't pay me enough that I would consider. I don't even get paid enough to buy a 12-pack. So like, I'm not like, and that's the thing with a lot of these podcasts, right? Like, we don't do it for the money.
No, of course not.
Not right away. Like, we just like having a voice. Like, it's cool to have a voice in this city and have people interact. That's what I love doing about this podcast. And I'm sure that's a big part of why you love radio. Like, the text people, people who text in. I was listening to a bit of that show with on Saturday with friends of the show, Chris Faber and David Quadrelli. It was that's kind of like the appeal of it.
Yeah. And, you talk about like the passion and being able to interact with people. I mean, here's the thing with, sports radio and sports media in general, like very, very few people are getting rich off of it. Right. So, I know everybody at Sportsnet 650, certainly, and I'm sure this is true for basically every sports radio station in North America. Like, we're all there because we love sports. We love talking about sports with people, right? We love the debate. We love the conversation. And I'll say for me specifically, my favorite part of the job is interacting with the listeners, right? Whether it's on a call, on Twitter, in the text message inbox, whatever it is, that's the best part of the job. And I think, that sense of community is like one of the best things about sports. And at its best, I think sports radio can really help build that up, right? Can help make fans feel like they're in it together, make them feel like they're a part of community. And, it doesn't always work out. There's some days where there's not as much to talk about, not as much to get into, but at its best, that's my favorite part of the job.
Yeah, and we'll get to more of your career in a bit, but we spent like the first 10 minutes talking about that. We got to talk about the team. We got to talk about the Vancouver.
Let's go.
We got to talk about the Vancouver Canucks. I think I made a joke before we started this interview. I think the Canucks, if you were to go on Natural Stat Trick, look up point percentage for moral victories, Vancouver Canucks would be in first place right now. It seems like, especially after those blowout games against Toronto, even that last game against Toronto, people are calling that a moral victory.
Yeah.
Seems like every game since then has been a moral victory.
Yep.
And it's all well and dandy to pick up moral victories, but you have to actually pick up actual victories at some point as well. And I'm worried that the Vancouver Canucks at this point, the runway's kind of run out for this team. I just don't see. You just look at the numbers. They play the most games. All these games have games in hand. They got to play essentially a President's Trophy level pace to get a playoff spot. I just don't think that's possible with this team.
They just dug themselves way too big a hole at the beginning of the season, right? Because, you look at this last, like you talked about it since the final game of that Toronto series, I think that's 7 games, right? That one, the 4 against Calgary, the 2 against Winnipeg. And I believe they picked up 6 points from those 7 games, right? Now they played well in pretty much all of those games, but they only picked up 6 points. If they had come into that stretch, even sitting at 500 or a game or two above 500, you could deal with that, right? You could deal with a run of games where you only pick up 6 points in 7. But because they were already in such a hole, you can't really hang your hat on, good process and the results will come, because there's just not enough time, right? They're already down to what, like 33, 34 games left in the season. So it just rings kind of hollow. Normally I'm a big process over results guy. Obviously results matter. You have to win the games, but in general, if you get your process right, the results will come. But that's only true in a long enough time frame, right? And the time frame we're talking about here is short enough that it doesn't really matter. And I will say the other thing is, so I'm not going to say this 7-game stretch is, the best the Canucks can play or anything like that, but they've been pretty good, and they've still only managed to pick up the 6 points. Even when this team is playing well for an extended stretch, that doesn't guarantee that they're going to win, 55, 60, 65% of the points that are available to them. That they're just not that talented of a team. So we talked about this on Canucks Central today with Vic Nazar, myself, and I mean, what would really have to happen to reshape the course of this season is for the team to go, 7, 8 wins in a row, win 10 of 11, 10 of 12, something like that. And even when they're playing well, it just doesn't feel like they have that streak in them, right? Like, unless Thatcher Demko lights the world on fire again for a 2-week stretch or something like that, I just think the good process here in the last couple of weeks is too little too late at this point.
Yeah, and I made this point earlier that they got to win these next 4 games, 2 against Winnipeg, 2 against Edmonton. They got to win all 4 of these games in regulation, not just win. Win in regulation, and then they got to win like 5, 6, 6 or 7 after that. It's a tall order, and we've talked about this on this network before. In a 56-game season, when you're only playing 6 other teams, getting off to a good start, not shooting yourself in the foot was going to be very important. And then I think when we go back, and it seems already weird, we're already talking about like postmortems and everything. We still got 2 months to play in the season, but I think when we go back and we look at this season, that's what's going to stand out. It's just they shot themselves in the foot too early. They didn't figure it out quick enough, and that was the downfall of this team. Is they shot themselves in the foot way too early, and the runway ran out, and they couldn't recover.
Yeah, that's absolutely going to be the case. And I think really you're going to look at the failure to kind of seize the momentum when they won those 3 against Ottawa and then played a really strong game and beat Winnipeg. And you're going to Montreal. You have a chance to look. I know Montreal is a good team. They're struggling recently, but obviously they played the Canucks really well. But you had a chance to kind of exercise some demons there from what Montreal had done to you previously in the season, right? And they blew it. They fell flat on their face, really. Like, they got blown out again. Yeah, they played maybe all right in the second game against Montreal, but still not nearly good enough. And then you just got whooped a couple times in Toronto, right? Couldn't take any points from those games. That, I think, more than anything, even more than what happened against Montreal at Rogers Arena, I think that stretch of 5 games is going to kind of be the turning point, because you had a building block. Even if you write off the Ottawa series and say, whatever, it's just the Senators, you still played that really strong game against Winnipeg, and then you wasted that opportunity. And that's kind of been the theme of the season for me since that point, is wasted opportunities, right? Like the 4-game set against Calgary, they're the better team in all those games, all 4 of those games. And okay, they take 5 points to Calgary's 4, but that's not nearly a good enough pace to really get back in this race. That was a wasted opportunity. Same with the 2 games against the Jets, right? You could argue the better team through 60 minutes overall, but just a combination of not getting the big saves, not getting the timely goals, and you come out with only 1 point to show for it. It's just not good enough.
Yeah, and you said Montreal's struggling right now. They're probably licking their chops, waiting to see when the Canucks are when they're playing the Canucks. Like, where they're Ottawa. Ottawa is to us what Montreal is to Vancouver.
It's funny how, because Ottawa keeps playing Toronto and Montreal really tough, and then against Edmonton, against Vancouver, they just roll over. They look like a disaster.
Yeah.
So I don't go figure that one, right? But Montreal must just be thinking about the good old days when they were playing the Canucks like every other night, basically.
Yeah, Tyler Toffoli scoring a hat trick every night. I think he only still has 1 goal against everyone else. I
believe that's right. Yeah,
but the Canucks, which is still wild to think about. So I think these last few games have shown that these adjustments should have probably come earlier. Everyone's talking about the third forward and on the forecheck kind of staying high. That probably should have come earlier. But you're seeing, even if they made that adjustment earlier, would they have how many of these games would that have flipped? How many would simply just having one guy not go on the forecheck, would that have changed the entire Canucks season? Or is this team just simply, because of the losses they occurred in the offseason, just not good enough? Maybe that's it.
Well, I think the team is good enough to, like, there are versions of the season where the team hangs around the playoff race and makes the playoffs at the end of the day, right? Like, I don't think the talent on this roster, you look at it and say, oh, no way, that's a playoff team. So I do, and before the year, I picked them to finish 4th, but I acknowledged it was going to be close, and kind of that group of 3 through 6 in this division was going to be really close. And I still think, it could end up that way. But I think in general, like most of the times, if you play the season out in a simulation, that's how it would go. Again, they just dug themselves such a big hole off the top of the season. The point about the adjustment on the forecheck is an interesting one, because Travis Green talked so much about the team not getting the practice time early in the season, and there's a temptation to kind of poo-poo that and be like, what does it really matter? Like, these guys should be able to execute. But we're seeing the results of it, right? I mean, really, in the space of a couple practices, they've completely, I don't want to say changed their structure, but they've fixed and improved their structure dramatically from where it was. Now, do you go back and say, oh, well, they would have won, 3 or 4 of the games they lost earlier?
That's where I struggle.
Not necessarily, right? But even if they win, 2 of those games, they're in a much better position now. And so it's tough to know how to judge it, because I think what we've seen over the last 2 weeks is probably something pretty close to like the true version of the Canucks, which is they're going to be really competitive against teams like Calgary and Winnipeg, going to struggle to win against Toronto. But even when they're very competitive against Calgary and Winnipeg, there's enough holes on the roster but you can still drop those games, right? Like, those, to me, those games against Calgary and Winnipeg are coin flip games. You know what I mean? And sometimes the Canucks are going to come out ahead on the coin flip. Sometimes the other team's going to come out ahead. That's kind of where they are. And it's just a question of, who gets the lucky breaks to make the playoffs, except that the Canucks have put themselves in a position where even if they get some lucky breaks down the stretch, it probably won't matter.
Yeah, and going back to your point about practice, Kyle Bowen and I have talked about that on Sipping on 40 before, and we were playing the old Allen Iverson clip.
Yeah,
We're talking about practice, not the game. Practice. We're like, are we idiots right now? Just talking about practice? Like, is that big of a deal? But I think that's a good point. Like, I'm sure after those poor defensive performances against Montreal and Toronto, Travis Green would love nothing more than a good practice to like hammer home, hey, don't blow the zone too early. Enough of these backhand passes in the defensive zone, just clean zone exits, right? Like, I'm sure he would love that, but the schedule this year just doesn't permit team practices or like team bonding at all. Like, we get that if you want, but I think it's another big thing.
Well, for sure. But you just think about, going back to the early part of the season, like if after that first game against Montreal, if they'd had 2 days off, and Travis Green could schedule 2 practices and just be like, what are you guys doing? This isn't how we play hockey. Like, what are you doing? Maybe the whole season's different. And I don't want to put too much stock in that, right? Because look, every team's dealing with challenges this year. Yeah, maybe the Canucks schedule is a little bit tougher, but it is kind of an interesting thought experiment. Like, if they had just that little, 1 or 2 extra days, would they have been able to get things on the track a whole lot faster?
Yeah, and I think a bright spot this season, transitioning a bit to the actual like good stuff the Canucks have done this year, is the development of Niels Hoglander. And I tweeted this out. Niels Hoglander plays like an absolute piece of shit, and I mean that. I mean that in like the most sincerest way possible, right? Like he's the type of guy who you would love to have on your team, but then if you're playing him, it's like, oh, we got to go against this guy again. Like he's doing like I'll admit he gets his elbow up a bit on the reverse hits. But like I like it. I like it. Like all the reverse hits. He's hard on the forecheck. He's got a bit of like, a piece of shit in his game. I like that. And I like that. Just the way he goaded Derek Forbort into jumping him at the end of the game and then everything else. Like, I think that's kind of stuff's like, we can talk about stats all we want. And I'm not ripping on stats. I love going up at natural stat trick. And I think like it's very useful to see how the numbers match up with how you've seen the game. But at the same time, like there is a human element to this game that cannot be quantified in, a stat line on natural stat trick. Like Niels Hoglander being an absolute pest to play against. I don't know how that shows up on the stat line, but I can see it, and I can see he's an absolute piece of shit, and I love it.
Yeah, well, you got to think it's the kind of thing that, like, over the long term, it pays dividends, right? Like, it might not equal points every game for him or for the team, but you're right. There's an element to that you need and you want on your team. You're right, man. He looks like annoying. It's just incredibly annoying to play against. And I loved even the scrum with Derek Forbort there. Like the next day, Derek Forbort said to the Winnipeg media, he was like, "No, there was nothing illegal about the hit. I was just pissed off at him." Like, what?
I love it.
Like,
I love it.
He's just like, he was just annoying. And it kind of makes sense, right? You think about like a guy who's not even 5'10", but who's not intimidated at all, and you're 6'4" or 220, whatever, Derek Forbort, and this guy is not showing you any respect, not showing you any like caution of you on the ice. That would be annoying, I can imagine. And it's the kind of thing, like, we heard a lot about Niels Hoglander's kind of tenacity, his grit, and all of that when he was still a prospect. I know, he served the suspension in Sweden for getting his elbow up on a guy, but you're never really sure how it's going to translate until you see it in the NHL, right? And for him to be playing like this as a rookie is amazing. Just like completely fearless, so much confidence, while also, I think it's often a really hard line to walk for rookies and young players, like between confidence and swagger, but also you're not doing stupid plays and getting yourself into bad positions. And like he's walking that line. Like, he very rarely makes glaring, noticeable mistakes, but he still has that swagger and that skill in his game. And then to combine it with, like you said, like just the edge that he brings, it's, man, I was high on him as a prospect, but like he has blown me away so far.
Yeah, and you know what I also like is Zach McEwen kind of backing him up the next game. And I'm not a big fan of like the code, got to respect the code and, all that stuff. And like, I know like someone, you just know someone would write a column or article like, how did Zach McEwen inspire this team to win? Like, that stuff doesn't really affect wins or losses. But again, the human element of the game, it's important that way. Like, you guys are on Sportsnet 960 or 950?
960.
960 in Calgary. So I'm sure you follow the Flames quite closely. And, I think, a big part of the whole Matthew Tkachuk thing is like, I'm watching that game, not to turn this into a Flames podcast or anything like that, but I watched that game, Edmonton, Calgary Saturday. I'm like, man, Matthew Tkachuk's the only guy out there who gives a shit. He's the only guy out there who gives a shit. And I was listening to Elliot Friedman's podcast on the way, and he talked about the players only meeting that these guys had, and it seems to me like Matthew Tkachuk came out of there saying like, I'm the only guy here who wants to win. Like, we like to make fun of the whole, like, they didn't flip the puck. No one did anything when Jake Muzzin flipped the puck at Matthew Tkachuk. But I think Matthew Tkachuk honestly came out of that players only meeting like, I'm the only guy who wants to win here. I'm the only guy like putting my heart and soul out there trying to win every game. These other guys don't really care. And I think it's created like a fracture in the locker room because of that. Again, I'm not in the locker room. This is just what I've observed from the outside. But again, that human element, like, you want to know, if you're Matthew Tkachuk, you want to know that your teammates have your back. And I don't think he has that right now. I don't think he has that assurance.
Yeah, I'm kind of two minds with the whole like fighting and sticking up for your teammates thing. Because one of the arguments that people make is, you have to do it to protect Elias Pettersson, to protect Niels Hoglander, because otherwise people are going to keep taking liberties on them in the future. And like, that's just not true. Like, Derek Forbort is not going to change his behavior one bit because Zach McEwen dropped the gloves of him, right? Like, he's still going to go out and hit guys and try to punish smaller players, whatever. Nobody around the league is looking at that and saying, oh, we better not touch Niels Hoglander because Zach McEwen's going to get in a fight with us. Like, that's just not how it works. These guys are paid to go out and be physical, to get under the other team's skin, right? So you're not protecting your players. Now, having said that, for what you're saying, which is just the idea of bringing a team together, I do think it matters, right? Like, I do think it's a good sign that Zach McEwen is willing to jump over the boards and drop the gloves to stick up for Niels Hoglander. I don't think it changes anything about, how teams will act towards Hoglander or Pettersson in the future. It doesn't affect that at all, but just internally for the Canucks, liking each other, getting along with each other, yeah, I do think it matters. And the other thing I'll say is, at least when, and I know a lot of people don't like the staged fight off the face-off or whatever, but at least when Forbort and McEwen drop the gloves there, it's over for the rest of the game. And we're not constantly wondering, is this going to get ugly? Is somebody going to do something stupid after the whistle, right? Those are the kind of games I hate the most. And those are the ones I think you look at historically that turn into the like ugliest, most dangerous situations, right? So
yeah,
I like
it early.
Exactly. Okay, like I know fighting's not actually like safe. We're still learning so much about concussions and CTE, but it's less dangerous than a lot of other things that happen on the ice. So get it out of the way, focus on hockey, and if it helps the team bond a little bit, helps the team bring the team together, then that's cool with me.
Yeah, again, it's the human element of the game.
Yeah.
Like you want to know if you're Niels Hoglander, your teammates have your back. And I guess I just compared it with the Matthew Tkachuk situation because I just think that team, and you follow the team as well. That team's like sinking like a stone. That team's circling the drain.
Well,
like,
the interesting thing was
if I'm the next GM of Calgary, you ever watch Office Space?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing I'd do if I was the next GM of Calgary, I go up to Sean Monahan and just be like, what exactly do you do here?
Yeah.
What exactly does a guy like Sean Monahan do? And I just think I think when we look back on that season for the Calgary Flames, and again, not turning this to the Calgary Flames podcast, but I think that's going to be a pivotal point is, there was a fracture there and something had to change from then on.
And the interesting thing with, you're talking about Matthew Tkachuk and just his kind of give a shit meter. Like, I don't know what you thought about that 4-game set against the Canucks, but like, he was invisible in that series, I thought. Yeah. And I think part of it is probably what you're talking about, where something is off in that locker room, right? And I don't know, I've heard people speculate that maybe the franchise kind of tried to tell him like, hey, you got to cut out the post whistle stuff a little bit.
I think Tkachuk only knows how to play one way.
That's the thing.
And I think his teammates are like, well, we don't want to have to answer to your antics.
Yeah, constantly,
shift,
right? Yeah,
right. And Matthew Tkachuk's like, well, what the hell? This is how I play. Either back me up or get the hell out.
Yeah, and you're seeing like what it looks like without him driving play and being engaged. It's pretty ugly for the Calgary Flames, right? So I don't know. They're kind of having the same conversations in Calgary that we were in Vancouver, like pre the Francesco Aquilini tweets, right? Like they're, I think Elliot Friedman said like the players are waiting for something to happen, whether it's a trade, coaching change, whatever it is. Tree Living's hired a bunch of coaches there, and eventually like GMs don't get to just keep hiring coaches because the GM is going to be the one gone at a certain point. So that situation feels like one that is due for big changes. Like I could see changes happening player, coach, management level, some combination, at least two, possibly all three in the summer there. Because like the fans, like, I mean, I read texts from Calgary every day, right? And like they're ticked off, they're not happy with it. Like Sean Monahan, Johnny Gaudreau, Mark Giordano, like the list goes on of people they're not happy with. And eventually something's got to give there because we always talk about with the Canucks wanting to avoid getting caught in that like mushy middle, right? Where you're not really bad, but you're not really good. I mean, that's where Calgary's been forever, right? Like they've been stuck in that loop for so long, and the frustration is just mounting there.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see where they go from there. Like, hey, maybe Travis Green goes over to Calgary. I'm sure Travis Green, like,
never know.
Yeah, like I'm sure they would love to poach another Canuck.
Yeah,
they would love it.
And I know, man, like we've had this debate. I might have even brought this up with you. I don't know when you were on this show, but like who do you blame most for what's happened with the Canucks season this year? And
I remember that question. It was, I think I said Jim Benning or management.
Yeah, for sure.
Was like management, players, coaches.
Yeah, exactly. If you just rank management, players, coach, like I'd probably go management 1, players 2, but whatever. Maybe we can debate about that. But like way down the list is Travis Green and his coaching staff, man. That to me, that guy's a good NHL coach. Even just look at how he's turned this team's season around from a process standpoint, right? Like you think of how battered and how fragile the confidence of the Canucks were, to get them to adjust their play style, buy in, reinvest in like all of these things that have made them successful, and actually go out there and play well despite not getting the results, despite all the discouragement. Like that's an impressive job by Travis Green. He's stuck with this team. He's never, given into the temptation to just absolutely rip them and throw them under the bus, or throw Jim Benning under the bus after the game or whatever. Like I think it would be such a mistake for the Canucks to let him go. I agree with you. If Calgary is without a coach and Travis Green's a free agent, I'm sure they would love to offer him their service, or to get his services.
There's going to be a bunch of teams who would love to have Travis Green on as their head coach. And I think that's what people struggle to understand when I talk to people online about Travis Green. Like, it's not exactly his fault. Like, he can't turn the clock back on Alex Edler. He can't make Tyler Myers more fleet of foot, or, stop his defensive mistakes. Get down not to do it, but at the end of the day, it's up to him. And I think there is a bunch of teams who would love to have Travis Green as their head coach. And maybe, some of these people don't watch hockey outside of the Canucks. I'm not trying to say they're idiots or anything like that. But like, look, Travis Green as a head coach has had 3 straight players be nominated for the Calder Rookie of the Year. One of them has actually won, Elias Pettersson. One came very close last year in Quinn Hughes. You don't think a rebuilding team or a retooling team or a team trying to bring up a next core of young players has seen what Travis Green has done with the Vancouver Canucks with these young players like the Brock Bessers, like the Elias Petterssons, like the Quinn Hughes, and says, hey, he would be a great fit for our team right here. Like there's let's just say like Detroit, right? Like Jeff Blashill's been there forever. He was our AHL guy. Want to bring a guy like Travis Green in when you have like your young crop of players, kind of groom them into that next great Red Wings team. What about a team like Anaheim? Anaheim's got a bunch of young players. I know he's from the Southern California area, or at least I think his family lives there still. He lives by himself when he's in Vancouver, right? So why not a team like that? Like there's a handful of teams who have young cores or about to take that next step with their young cores who would be like Travis Green. I think he would be a good fit here.
There's another coaching spot that's going to be open in Seattle, right? Like, and it's not exactly the situation you're describing with a young core, but it's still a team that has to build from the ground up. And I think you could talk yourself into Travis Green if you were the Kraken for sure. I'll say this. I think one way or another, Travis Green's going to be coaching in the NHL next year, right? Like whether it's with the Canucks or whether it's with another franchise, I don't see him sitting on the shelf for another year. His services are going to be in demand.
Yeah, and I think another big thing with Travis Green not having a contract this year is he's making moves to win now, because he may not have a head coaching job with the Vancouver Canucks if he doesn't win that much, right? Like I think of the goaltending situation right now, and I think if Travis Green has a contract for, let's say 2023, he's riding Demko the rest of the way, because he realizes Thatcher Demko is going to be the starter going forward for this team. He's going to sign a new contract after this season. He's an RFA. He's going to have a long-term deal. Braden Holtby's not a long-term solution. Just ride Demko. And what about a guy like Jake Virtanen? If he was up to, you can see, I think, some comments with Jim Benning and Travis Green. Jim Benning wants to play Jake Virtanen, right? Because he signed him obviously to that deal, and he wants to have some value for him. And Travis Green's like, well, I got to win. And if Jake Virtanen's not going to give me that assurance that I need, I'm not going to put him in the lineup. Maybe he plays even Olli Juolevi more if he has a long-term contract extension. But at the same time, I'm not a big fan of Olli Juolevi. So maybe if he even had a contract extension, he wouldn't play him much. So like, I think if Travis Green had, a long-term contract extension before this season, we would see a lot more different moves in terms of how much ice time he's giving certain guys and who he's playing in net. Because I don't know about you, but I didn't really see the point of starting Holtby that Sunday game. I thought like Demko, he lost, but he didn't get any run support. He let in 1 goal.
Yeah, so first of all, then I'll say if you were wanting to see more of a run from Thatcher Demko, I think you're probably going to get your wish here, because you're talking about the difference between like coaching for the future and coaching for the present. Well, now at this point, both of those paths lead to starting Thatcher Demko, right? Like he's clearly playing better than Braden Holtby right now, and he's the goalie of the future. So why not try to make him your number one.
Again, because Travis Green needs to win right now. That's
but I think what I'm saying is I think from this point on in the season, even trying to win right now means starting Thatcher Demko. Right. So I do think you'll get your wish there. I would say, like, in general, with the, game to game, which goalie should start, I'm fine with kind of deferring to Ian Clark a little bit. Like, if it had been up to me, yeah, I would have started Thatcher Demko. He played a really good game on Friday. I understand the idea that they've been trying to get both guys going, but I think we've reached the point now where it's pretty clear Thatcher Demko is going to be the better goalie this year. Just ride him unless he completely drops the ball and blows the opportunity, right? He's your number one goalie until proven otherwise. Like, we've seen enough from Braden Holtby at this point. I think he can still be a quality backup for the team for this year and maybe next, depending on what happens with the expansion draft. But yeah, it's basically time to turn it over to Thatcher Demko. Like, the whole idea about is he coaching for the now? Is he coaching for the future? It's interesting because I think that, you look at the position that Jim Benning is in. And yeah, he's under contract past this offseason. I know he got the vote of confidence from Aquilini, but I still get the sense, and I still think that if the Canucks miss the playoffs this year, this is probably Jim Benning's last year on the job, right? So yeah. I would think that there would be alignment between the general manager and the coach on, should we be playing for the future, should we be playing for the present? Like, I think both guys probably really want to play for the here and now and get as many wins as they can. The Jake Virtanen one is interesting because, yeah, it does seem like there's just a disagreement about the value of Jake Virtanen between the head coach and the general manager. I mean, Jake, when he's in the lineup now, is often like the low man in terms of ice time for the team. So it seems pretty clear that if Travis Green thought he had better options, Virtanen would be in the press box on a pretty regular basis. Yeah, I don't know. That the Virtanen deal in general, like, we've talked about Virtanen so much on the show, and I'm as guilty of it as anyone of bringing him up at every opportunity. Just there's just always something to talk about, right? But man, I wish there was an easy way to walk away for them from Jake Virtanen, right? Like, I wish that it
was last offseason.
I know, right? And they didn't take it, and now here we are having the same conversations, looking for a trade partner, salary on the books for next year, and it's just never going to happen with him. That's I don't know what else to say about him at this point.
Yeah, to quote Stephen A. Smith, Jake Virtanen is a bona fide scrub. That's what I call Jake Virtanen at this point in his career. But look, Frank, you mentioned the tweets, Francesco Aquilini coming out to support Jim Benning, Travis Green. Hey, if you support Travis Green, you know what the easiest way to support him is? Give him a contract extension. Get him under contract for like the next 3-4 years. That's the way you show support. Not from some random Twitter thread you put out, 3 hours before a game.
Yeah. And I that to me really undercuts the message, right? And that's why it's still very fair to speculate about what happens in the offseason, if and when this team misses the playoffs, right? Because you're right, like, actions speak louder than words. And the action with regard to the coach is not, oh, he's the guy we want long term necessarily, right? Like, that's the reporting that we hear. And hey man, I understand it's a pandemic, all of that, income streams have been hurt, but you can still find the money to invest in Travis Green. It's not like it's coming out of your checkbook this year, right? It's not coming out of your account until next year when hopefully fans will be back in the season. So I agree. It really undercuts the idea that, oh, we're fully committed to this group when you're letting Travis Green. I mean, at this point, it would be stunning if he signed an extension before the end of the season, right? Like, why would you if you're him? Why not go to the open market and see what's out there?
On yourself.
So, yeah, exactly. So it's a great point. I made it at the time. I know Sat Shaw was on that too. Like, okay, words, a Twitter thread's great. It helps put out the fire for a little bit here, but actions speak louder than words ultimately.
Yeah, and also, Jamie, when we talked about Ian Clark, you're supposed to say, we're on a podcast, so we'll say, I know more than Ian Clark. No more.
Why are they listening to him? Get out of here.
What the hell does this guy know? Come on, you gotta get a conversation.
I try to avoid it because it's such a boring thing to say. Oh, well, I don't know. The coach probably knows best. Yeah. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of sports talk radio, right? But I will say, goaltending it's such a specific, unique thing, and Ian Clark is so well regarded that I'm willing to do it in that scenario, right? Yeah. But yeah, I try to avoid just being like, I don't know, I guess whatever the coach says is cool. Like, who cares, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think another bright spot this season has been the play of Nate Schmidt. Now, I think he's a bit polarizing a season for for a number of reasons. First of all, he makes all these big kind of 5-alarm mistakes.
Yep.
We saw one last night with I guess you can call it an own goal. I don't know if you was it.
Yeah.
I guess you could call it an own goal. Technically, was he had one the other night against the Calgary. He's had a couple, he's had a lot of these kind of what I call like 5-alarm mistakes, like kind of ones that get seared in your brain. But if you look at the numbers, him and Alex Edler have been one of the most underrated defensive pairings in the league. Like Nate Schmidt has had a really good, in my opinion, start to the season. It's just these 5-alarm mistakes that he keeps making that kind of pull down his perception in the market. Like, what do you think about Nate Schmidt so far this season?
Yeah, I was initially a little disappointed, and now maybe my expectations were too high because I was a big fan of that deal when they brought him over. Like, I really liked the impact he could bring to the blue line. I do think it took him a little while to find his legs and to get going, which is not all that surprising. Yeah, there's two things going on with Nate Schmidt. One is, as you say, the mistakes when they happen have been very noticeable, and almost all of them have ended up in the back of the net. And the crummy thing is, like, you look at the goal last night, right, that he ends up pushing over the line after it squeezes through Holtby. Like, it's not as if that's just bad luck for Nate Schmidt. You know what I mean? Like, that's not like a brutal gaffe where you're like, oh, what are you doing? Like, he's trying to stop it going over the line, and he happens to push it in. That's just bad, dumb luck. He has made some other mistakes too, but overall his play has been really solid. And watching that game last night, I was, before Winnipeg got on the scoreboard, I was jotting down my notes like, Schmidt and Edler, their chemistry has come so far. They're playing so well. Like, I think they really have done a better job of, like, one thing I've noticed from Alex Edler is even at his age, he's getting up in the play a lot, right? And I think that's made possible because he has an understanding with Nate Schmidt at this point. But I like how that pairing is going. I think it bodes well for the future of the Canucks that Nate Schmidt is kind of quietly having a positive year. And I will say the other thing, in addition to the gaffes, is he hasn't been as noticeable and as productive offensively as I think a lot of people would have liked. Like, he's playing a solid defensive game. He's helping drive play, but the points haven't necessarily come. So when you just think of like what a lot of fans look at when they're judging a defenseman, right, is he producing points and is he making mistakes that end up in the back of the net? And Nate Schmidt is not checking the good side of either of those boxes right now, even though he's doing a lot of other things really well.
Yeah, and one guy who is piling up the points, but his defense may be struggling this season, depending on who you talk to, is Quinn Hughes. Now, you take callers from Vancouver all the time. I think you have a very good pulse on what fans are thinking. Are we ready to have a discussion about Quinn Hughes' defensive play this year? Are people ready for that discussion? Because he's putting up the points, but his defensive play, I think, has really taken a step back this year.
Yeah,
you can call out a number of reasons as to why. I think Chris Tanev, I think, is a big one. But like, are people ready to have that discussion yet? Like, I get he's putting up the points, but you look at the numbers, his defense has not been great.
Man, the people we text in, they're ready to have that conversation. I'll tell you what, they are more than ready to have that conversation.
The needle has moved.
We get texts, like, move Quinn Hughes to left wing, like he's going to be 50. He's going to be a minus 50 this year. He's going to join the 50-50 club, minus 50 points. We get all that right on a regular basis. And I get it. It hasn't been pretty this year. Like, he's had some major gaffes. Just overall, his play driving numbers are down from where they were last year. That started to trend in the right direction. I do think if you look at the start of the season, and Quinn Hughes even kind of alluded to it, I think when they were in Toronto, he kind of made a reference to like, oh, I'm finally healthy or something. I think he was dealing with something nagging because Quinn Hughes, the number one thing is his skating, right? And I thought early in the season, his skating was noticeably below the level we saw last year. And we always think about what his skating does for him offensively, but that's how he succeeds defensively too, right? Like the ability to, not only use his skating to be in the right position, but also when he recovers the puck in the defensive zone, to use his skating to immediately get out of trouble. That's the biggest thing I've noticed with Quinn Hughes early in the year. It wasn't, his one-on-one defending necessarily. It was like, I remember in Quinn Hughes' rookie year, every time he got the puck in the defensive zone, you could basically just breathe a sigh of relief because one way or another, the Canucks were going to leave the zone with control of the puck, right? Like, I know that's not technically true, but that's what it seemed like. It's like, oh, Quinn Hughes has the puck. Threat over, right? They've won. They're going to transition now. And it just wasn't like that early. And I think part of that was his skating wasn't at a level that allowed him to just kind of effortlessly create space for himself and escape danger. And so there were a lot of times where he would get the puck behind the net, but the opposing player would pressure him, force a turnover, a bunch of shot attempts and maybe a goal, follow that. So I think now that his skating is getting back to the level we saw last year, you're starting to see improved defensive results. Look, I don't know if he's ever going to be Nick Lidstrom back there, right? But the idea that, it's a fatal flaw in his game, I don't buy. Like, I'm betting on Quinn Hughes. You look at what he's accomplished in the NHL already, I'm more than comfortable betting on Quinn Hughes. And I think just the fact that we've seen improvement already from the beginning of the year to where he is now, I think that's a big deal, right? Like, that's one of the things I always look for. Like, can you identify what's going wrong and fix it and do it quickly? And Quinn Hughes has always shown that ability to add new features to his game, to add new wrinkles to how he plays. And it's still a work in progress. I mean, he's still really young. It's a fair conversation because he has left something to be desired in the defensive end, but I just think long term, man, that's not high on my list of things to be worried about with the Canucks. You know what I mean? Like, Quinn Hughes will be fine. If you got Quinn Hughes as your number one defenseman, you're doing all right.
Yeah, and it's funny. I used to, my buddy's a big Sens fan, and we used to make fun of Erik Karlsson all the time. Oh, this guy's just pretty much a forward. He doesn't play any defense. And how people are saying the same thing about Quinn Hughes. I'm like, what the hell? No, you're wrong. Like, he's gonna figure it out.
Yeah. No, he'll be fine, man. Like, and here's the thing. It's all about, at the end of the day, it's all about outscoring your opponent, right? So if you're a defenseman and you do that by helping your team score more goals than usual, great, right? It doesn't all, like, yes, you need to be able to play to meet a certain threshold of play in your own defensive end, but guess what? It's really good to be constantly having the puck and creating chances, right? Like, if you're a defenseman, you can help your team do that. That's awesome. So again, is he ever going to be, Zdeno Chara or Nick Lidstrom? No, probably not. But can he meet a level of defensive responsibility to be a number one defenseman on a contending team? Yeah, absolutely he can.
Yeah, I'll take him being the next Erik Karlsson.
That's not bad. That's really
San Jose.
Good.
Pre San Jose.
Yes,
pre San Jose.
Boat anchor contract in San Jose. Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's wild how bad that contract has turned around. Like, at the time, it's like, okay, yeah, it's Erik Karlsson. Like, why wouldn't you give him a huge deal? But now it's just like, oh, I don't know.
It's ugly, man. That whole franchise's situation, their cap sheet in general is pretty gnarly right now. Like, you look at Martin Jones, still got a bunch of years left, like Brett Burns and Plastic. Like, it's Doug Wilson's been a great GM for a long time, but he's in a tough spot there.
Yeah, maybe one of the few teams whose cap-friendly pages looks worse than the Vancouver Canucks. I'll say that. So we mentioned it earlier. You were a producer for the Scott Rintoul Show, which is not only on here, Sportsnet 650 here in Vancouver, but in Calgary. So what's it like preparing for like two different like teams and markets? Like, it's gotta be interesting. I remember having Scott Rintoul on back in June. I think you may have just started the show back then. I don't remember when it started. I asked a similar question, but I'm interested to see like what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Like, I think we might be the only like terrestrial sports radio show in Canada that's produced in Canada and broadcast into multiple markets, right? Like, there are syndicated shows from the States and stuff, but we might be the only show that is designed to serve two markets, right? And it's definitely an adjustment. I will say, I mean, I think Scotty is one of the best hosts in the city to handle it, because he just tends to have more of kind of a national, bigger perspective than just what's going on in Vancouver. Like, I will say, for a season like this, it's not so bad, right? Because we just got into talking about the Flames, right? Like, people are paying attention to the Flames anyways. It's a Canadian division. In Calgary, they're paying attention to what's going on in Vancouver, right? Like, if Vancouver fires their general manager, that's a big story in Calgary, right? If Calgary fires Brad Treliving, that's a big story in Vancouver. So there's enough crossover that way. But yeah, I mean, other than that, it's just finding, the good guests and the good stories that have crossover appeal, right? So finding, the commentator that can speak on both markets. Finding, if there's one thing we'll do is, if there's a team out east in the United States that's on like a 10-game winning streak, we'll bring on someone to talk about that team, right? Because we figure, hey, there's fans in Vancouver are NHL fans. Fans in Calgary are NHL fans. So we try to cast just kind of a wider net on things. And overall, it's been really successful, I think. Like, I think, there's some initial maybe pushback when people hear us talking about the Flames for 5 or 10 minutes. Like, what's going on? This is Vancouver radio. What are you doing? But Scotty's really good at tying it into what's going on in Vancouver, drawing the parallels, making those connections. And I think people get on board with it. And it's also just kind of an easy way to make your show distinctive, right? Because it's not always just, a half hour about, where should Jake Virtanen play in the lineup, right? And listen, man, like I love doing that too. I enjoy doing that. I do that on Canucks Central with Vic. It's a lot of fun, and that's not a slight against anyone. That's just not an option for us. So we have to find other things to talk about. We have to find creative ways to, cover the Canucks while also giving due to the Flames, while also giving due to every other story around the league and around sports, right? I mean, since the season started, we've been heavy on the NHL, obviously, but Scotty's huge fan of the NFL. He's a fan of of Major League Baseball, basketball, right? So we do try to cover as much other sports as we can as well.
Yeah, and how long have you been producing that show for?
I started producing October 2019, I believe.
Oh, okay, so a while now.
Yeah, that's when the show launched. When we made some changes at Sportsnet 650, and yeah, I was hired. I was doing kind of part-time casual work for 650 before that, and they hired me full-time as the producer to work with Scotty. And it's been a wild ride because I mean, like October 2019, so we were on the air like not even 5 months before the pandemic hit. And since then, I've been doing it for almost a whole year, broadcasting from home, which is kind of wild to think. Like Scotty and I were in studio together for like 4 or 5 months, and then we've been out of studio for basically a whole year. But yeah, it's I think overall the experiment's been successful. Like it definitely, as I said, it's something new to the radio business. It has not really something that's been done before, so we're kind of just making it up as we go along as well. But I think we've found the kind of formula to keep people on both sides. As we say, like both sides of the Rockies is often what we say on the show. Like we've found the formula to keep them engaged, keep them entertained, and we've kind of proven that it can work to a certain extent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's honestly a very underrated show in the city. I think, even though it does focus maybe on Calgary, but like I think you guys do a good job balancing the two, and I appreciate the fact that it's it maybe can be difficult, but you find a way, and I think that's a job well done. Canucks Central. What was the idea behind having, random low level podcasters like myself on there?
Well, it was something I kind of, I have to give credit to the head honcho in case he listens to this. I can't steal his idea, but it was something the boss, the program director at 650 mentioned to me. I've been doing a show on Friday nights on Sportsnet 650. And, he said for the upcoming season, like he really wanted to have wall to wall on Saturdays, local live game day coverage of the Canucks, right? So, we have a bunch of other shows that go earlier on Saturdays, and he wanted me to kind of fill the gap between those shows and the official pregame show. And I was like, great, that sounds awesome. That sounds really fun. I'd love to do it. And, he said, you should think about, like, we've got all these podcasts in the community. Like, you should think about using that as a resource, right? And I one part of it for me is, you look at like, we just naturally, in sports radio, we have a lot of the same people on over and over again, right? And that's because they're really good. Like it's great to have Murph on to talk Canucks, right? Or to have IMAX on to talk about the Canucks. Like that's awesome. They're smart, knowledgeable guys. They have a good rapport with the host. It's good radio. But I don't necessarily want to be just repeating that on my show on Saturday, right? Like give those guys a break, right? You let them do their thing Monday to Friday, give them a rest on Saturday, and try to find some new voices. And it was basically just, like, well, there are all of these voices talking about the Canucks in the podcast community. So let's try it out and let's see how it goes. And, like I said, it's been really, really successful so far. I've been really happy with it.
Yeah. It makes for a great radio when you have podcasters on the radio. I like, as a fellow podcaster myself, you got to bring your A game. Like this is radio. This is the big times.
Yeah. And plus, I like, I like to, I don't know, like, look, I get it. It's like a Saturday afternoon show. It's not like it's prime time or anything, but I like to try to give other people a platform, right? Try to give people a boost that are doing good work. As you said, like your family was excited about it and all that.
My whole family was, they don't even listen to a full episode of this, but they were listening to me on the radio.
Yeah. And that's awesome. So that feels good. Right. And as you said, I mean, people, they got to bring their A game. Everyone who's done it so far has been awesome. Which is great because as I said off the top of the show, like you're always a little concerned, like you're bringing someone onto radio for the first time. There can be some nerves, there can be a little bit of anxiety about it, but it's been great. And as I said, also the feedback from listeners has been really positive too.
Okay, that's good to hear. I never heard any feedback after my hit, so I assumed it was either really good. And you know what? Honestly, if I had messed up, I'm sure I would have heard somehow. Someone would have tagged me on Twitter. Like that would not have been an issue.
I think one of the great things about Canucks fans is they're very supportive of the people like doing the work in the community, right? And every time I announce that someone is, one of the podcasters coming on the show, I get a ton of texts being like, "That's awesome, that's great. I'm so glad to see that person's getting an opportunity." So it's a very, as much as it can be kind of crazy and people get worked up and people get aggressive about sometimes some pretty odd things, like I think ultimately it is a pretty supportive network of people, and people are generally happy to see hard workers and talented people get opportunities, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been going for close to an hour here, so I want to end off with just one question, and we'll see how long we can debate this for.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so is it too early to discuss what the Canucks are going to do at the trade deadline? Is that too early?
No, not at all.
Is that too early?
Not. No way. No, it's prime time. Are you kidding, man? Let's go.
I think the trade deadline this year is like mid-April or something like that. So we got another solid month and a half to talk about the trade deadline. But there are a few people I think could be on the block if the Canucks decide to go down that route.
Well, here's the thing. Hold on. Yes, the trade deadline isn't until whatever date in April it is, but I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to make moves well before that this year because of the quarantine rules, right? Like I don't think it's going to be necessarily a right down to the wire thing. So yeah, it might be 6 weeks from now until the trade deadline, but you probably want to start making your moves maybe 4 weeks from now, right? So yeah, let's go. I'm all for the trade.
Okay, Brandon Sutter. Is there any chance Jim Benning gives up on his boy Brandon Sutter?
I think there is. I mean, it was so funny. He had his kind of renaissance, so to speak, early in the season, right? Scores the hat trick against Ottawa.
Scored last night.
Yeah, scored last night as well. We started getting texts for the first time ever, like, "Hey, do you guys think they should bring Brandon Sutter back next year?" Like, never, ever happened, right? No. And I still don't see that happening unless it's on like a 1 year, $1 million deal, that kind of thing. But I don't see it happening. So I think it's plausible that Jim Benning could try to move him. Now, whether he'll be able to, right? Whether a team will be willing to take on Brandon Sutter for any sort of appreciable asset, I think that's a bit of an open question. But I can see it. I don't think Jim Benning's affinity for Brandon Sutter would prevent him from doing
so. Tanner Pearson. Do you think he has a chance of getting traded? He is a free agent after this year.
Yeah, I think so for sure. And I mean, I've heard some rumblings already, like that there's interest between the two sides.
Insider.
No. This is public stuff. Okay. I am like the farthest away from an insider. Don't worry. I'm not dropping any scoops on this podcast, that's for sure. But I've seen it reported, I should put it that way, I guess, that maybe there's a little bit of interest in both sides on Tanner Pearson coming back. I just think, like, I like Tanner Pearson as a player, but if you can get a second or a third round pick for him at the trade deadline, you pretty much got to do it, right? Get clean slate. You've got Vasily Podkolzin coming over next year that you like to take that spot in your in your top six. And it's not as if Tanner Pearson is an irreplaceable player, right? Like, get the asset for him, try to find an equivalent at a cheap deal on the UFA market would be my approach.
JT Miller. Is there a chance that the Canucks move on from JT Miller? You would probably be selling a bit too low on JT Miller. He's still putting up the points, but again, some of these effort, and we haven't really talked about JT Miller's like play that much. Some of these effort plays, like he'll give the puck over. I think we all remember that goal that Austin Matthews scored him, where he just kind of had the controller disconnected defense.
Yeah.
Like, it's like some of these effort plays, especially after he gives away the puck, have just been absolutely brutal. So, like, would you trade JT Miller if you're Jim Benning, or is it kind of selling low and you want to keep that chemistry with the Lotto line going?
Yeah, the interesting thing with JT Miller, and you're right, his play has been so frustrating this year. I don't know if you would be selling low necessarily, because you look like he's still putting up points, right? And that holds weight for teams around the league, because you can sell, hey, we brought in a point a game player at the trade deadline. Like, wow, what a great move. So I actually do think you can get a decent return for JT Miller. I don't see it happening, because when they went out, first of all, it's a signature winning deal for Jim Benning, right? Like, I know some people will still be like, first round pick, they could have squeeze Tampa for more. But just you look at it, what he gave them last year, what they gave up. Like Jim Benning won that deal, right? And that you can't point to too many of those. So I think there's an element of that, and also you mentioned the chemistry with the Lotto line. I think in general, they want JT Miller to be like a big part of the leadership of this team, a big part of like the emotional culture of this team. And I don't think they're willing to give up on that because he has been off his game for, 30 games or whatever it is by the trade deadline. So look, man, I'm all for the outside the box ideas. I don't see that one happening. I don't think I would stick with JT Miller as well.
We'll combine these two, Adam Gaudette and or Jake Virtanen.
Man, Jake Virtanen, like if you find someone who can look, I don't think this is going to happen, but if you could get a pick for him and not take salary back, you do it in a heartbeat, right?
Yeah, even if do that every day of the week and twice on Sundays.
If it's a conditional 7th round pick, man, you hang up the phone and take that deal as soon as it's offered. Now, I will say, I think the template for a Jake Virtanen pick is probably more, or a Jake Virtanen deal is probably more like the Tanner Pearson trade, right? You remember that it was Eric Branson going the other way, and it was basically seen at the time as two players who have no value, and we'll just swap them because they both need a change of scenery, and we'll trade you one problem. We'll trade you our problem for your problem. And the Canucks ended up getting by far the better end of that deal, right? Tanner Pearson turns his career around. Eric Branson still, a marginal defenseman with Ottawa. So I think probably that's what a Jake Virtanen deal looks like is, hey, we have a problem player who's due to make $2.5 million next year. You have a problem player who's due to make $2.5 million next year. Let's flip them and, flip a coin basically to see who gets the better end of the deal. And I would still take that deal just because where Jake Virtanen's at with the coaching staff of this team and the minutes he's playing, clean slate, man, clean slate for him, clean slate for the coaching staff. Let them bring in a new player, see if that player can fill a role better than Virtanen's doing right now. Gaudette, I would be a little more hesitant. It would depend on the return. It's not like with Jake Virtanen, it's like trade him to get him out of the franchise, right? Before you even start
get him out of town. Get him out of town.
Before you even start talking about the return, it's like, no, he just needs to go. That's not the situation with Adam Gaudette. For me, it would depend on the return, but you should absolutely be open to trading him, right? Because I think it's pretty clear at this point, Travis Green doesn't see him as a center, as a third line center. So you need to fill that spot. And he's just so much more expendable as a bottom six winger than he would be as a third line center. So if somebody really bites on the value of Adam Gaudette and offers you something good, yeah, I'd pull the trigger.
Yeah, it's clear to me that Travis Green doesn't really trust Adam Gaudette's defensive game. He doesn't really like Jake Virtanen. I think I hold out hope for a Brandon Sutter trade just because his last name's Sutter. And there is some old school hockey guy, old school hockey executive house here who says, we need a Sutter on this team right now. Yeah. That'll take us over the top. That's why I'm holding out hope for the Brandon Sutter trade.
Hey, Brian Burke just got hired in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. Oh, man. He would love to have a guy like Brandon Sutter back in Pittsburgh. Oh, my
you got to have a Sutter. Got to have a Sutter.
Got to have a Sutter if you want to win.
Yeah.
Look at all the success the Canucks have had over the years.
Hey, you never know. It wouldn't shock me if a team bit on Brandon Sutter. Man.
I'm sure. People think like he's like I said, like a bona fide scrub. Like, hey, you scored last night. Like, I'm sure like some team would love to have like an extra center in the. It's like defenseman. You can never have too many centers. You can never have too many defensemen when you go on a long playoff.
Yeah.
Run. So
that's the thing.
I'm sure someone would bite.
Some team who's playing like a young second or third year player as their fourth line center could absolutely talk themselves in to bringing Brandon Sutter in to fill that role.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jamie, thank you so much for joining
my pleasure,
the podcast,
man.
And hopefully we could have you on again sometime.
I was going to say,
I'm waiting on the message for radio.
Yeah, we'll see who caves and gives the return invitation first.
Yeah, no, I'm not blinking.